Hey everyone.
Hey guys.
Welcome to another Travel Therapy Mentor video. It's been quite a while since we recorded a video or a podcast. It's been 6 weeks. That's the longest we've ever gone. 5 years now that we've gone between videos. We were pretty busy. We've been traveling a lot, so we're going to talk about what we've been doing in the last 6 weeks, talk about our trip, and also about CSM, which we just got back from. So Whitney's going to introduce us, and I'm going to get this video shared in our groups.
All right, hey everyone. For those that may not know us, my name is Whitney Kazaza.
And I'm Jared Kazaza.
And we're both traveling doctors of physical therapy. We've been travel PTs since 2015. And we started Travel Therapy Mentor in 2018. And as Jared mentioned, we started making these live videos and subsequently putting them on podcast format in 2019. So this is actually the longest video hiatus we've taken in those 5 years. We used to do them every single week. And then as our lives got busier and our travels got busier, it was usually like every other week. Every now and then we've gone 3 weeks, but we just had a really busy trip recently. So it's been 6 weeks. It's been since before the new year that we made a video. So sorry to leave you guys hanging. But yeah, we're excited to be home and excited to tell you about the trip that we just went on and just give you some life updates and everything. So hopefully a few of you guys will be able to join in with us tonight. Hi, Allie. Thanks for joining. Long time no see. If anybody else is on live, we'd love if you just say hey in the comments and let us know that you're watching. Let us know how you are. If you're a current traveler, if you're somebody thinking about traveling, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, so I don't even know if we talked about what we were going to do on the trip before we left. I know we mentioned we were leaving, but I don't think we even really talked much about the trip. But back before this trip, we said on our last one in Europe we got back from in August, we were saying that was going to be our last trip. And we thought that was going to be the case. And then we realized that, we've been to 6 continents and we have done most of the things we wanted to do in terms of travel, but we had never been to Patagonia, and that was definitely on our bucket list. So we're like, maybe we could plan one more trip. It's always one more trip.
When he says trip, like one more, like one of our long international trips.
Yeah, long international trip. And so we're like, okay, one more trip, go to Patagonia and see Antarctica. And it just so happened that 2 of our friends also were thinking about settling down, coming to the end of their, long international trips like us. And they were like, well, we might do one more trip and we want to go to Patagonia. And we were like, oh man, that'd be really cool. So then we talked to them, and we ended up planning the majority of this trip with them. And that was the first time we've ever really planned a trip with other people, but it was a lot of fun. We really enjoyed it. And we did a cruise to Antarctica. We hiked a lot in Patagonia, and we also made a stop in Ecuador on the way home. And it was definitely one of our most fun trips. I always say that, one of our best trips, but it was also definitely one of our most action-packed trips. And that's why we really didn't have much time to record videos or really do much social media at all.
Yeah, for those that, some of you guys that are watching or listening may know us really well and know a lot about our life history, but we've been travelers for going on 9 years now, and we keep saying like we're probably going to settle down more, not travel quite as much, hopefully start a family soon. And we got married last summer after dating for 10 years and said that we were going to do this big trip, which was our honeymoon trip to Europe this past summer, and then that was going to be it. We were going to start looking for a house, which we are in our house right now. We have a house, but we're looking for a different house.
A forever house.
And hopefully have kids soon and all that. But for a long time, we've been really wanting to do Patagonia. So it just really worked out that these other travel PT friends of ours that also wanted to go to Patagonia, we went to our final national park in September with them. And we, again, had never really gone on a trip with other people before. We usually travel on our own for these multi-week, multi-month international trips. So it was a really interesting experience planning a trip with other people, but luckily our friends, Laura and Justin, who are also travel PTs, are super similar to us, and we had a really good time. It went really smooth. In fact, they're thinking about settling down soon as well and maybe having kids, and we've joked about like we should go on more trips together, maybe like bring our kids, and I don't know, who knows what the future will hold, but it was actually amazing. So we actually left on December 31st, right before the new year, to head out on this trip because the flights were cheaper that day instead of waiting until the 1st or the 2nd. So we were in the air during like when the new year came. So our first stop was in Buenos Aires.
Yeah, there was actually a couple reasons for going on the 31st. We mainly planned this entire trip. Hey Kaylee, thanks for joining. We mainly planned this trip around the cruise down to Antarctica, and we found a really good deal on a cruise, and it was on January 3rd. And so we wanted to be down there minimum a day or two early because we have had pretty rough experiences with flights lately. We didn't know what would happen. Who knows when things will get delayed, and you would not want to miss a 16-day cruise because of a flight delay. So we wanted to make sure we went decently early, and then from there we were looking at either like the 1st or 2nd, probably like the 31st or the 1st, and it just worked out that on the 31st there was a really good option for using points to fly down there. So yeah, we were in the air on New Year's, and that was a unique experience too.
It actually worked out really well because almost nobody was flying. So we had the plane was really empty, and we had like multiple rows just to ourselves. So it was the ultimate poor man's first class, where we both had like full rows to lay down in and actually sleep.
It was awesome. That was the coolest flight because it was one of the planes that has 3 seats on one side, 3 seats on the other, and then 4 seats in the middle. And the plane was less than probably a fifth of the way full. So everybody on the plane pretty much had at least 3 seats to themselves, and some people had 4 whole seats to themselves. So I was able to get one of those middle 4-seat rows and sleep the entire time. And normally sleeping on planes is really difficult, but it's not difficult when you can lay all the way down.
Yeah, so it was a pretty long flight to get all the way down to Buenos Aires in South America. So if you're not up on your geography, when you head down to South America in the other hemisphere, their seasons are opposite. So that was the reason why we had to go in January, because that's really one of the only times of the year that you can go down to Patagonia and to Antarctica, especially because in their winter you can't pass through the ice to get to Antarctica. So a lot of the very popular cruises to Antarctica are December, January, February, which is their summer. So that's why we went during this time of year. So yeah, the whole Antarctica thing like that, originally to us seemed like some far off distant dream. We didn't necessarily have that as a goal, but once we were talking to our friends and they were like, well, while we're down in Patagonia, we've also been looking at Antarctica cruises. Like it would be easy just to take a cruise and go down there. And we started looking at cruises and comparing them. We ultimately decided to go on a cruise with Princess Cruise Lines, and it was actually very affordable. We got a good deal on it, and it was $2,000 each for 16 days, and that includes all your food, obviously all your lodging, all your ports and everything, and you get to see Antarctica.
Yeah.
So we got a lot of questions about the logistics of that cruise. So unfortunately, with the cruise line that we went on, they are a bigger cruise line, so we were on a ship of 3,000 passengers.
2,600 people.
So 2,600 passengers, over 1,000 crew. So it's a big ship. And so those ships do not dock in Antarctica or don't have you get off the ship, unfortunately, and make landings.
Yeah, we were a little bit on the fence about that and went back and forth, and we looked at different prices. And the ships that you actually get off in Antarctica, you get off and walk around. Not only are they like 4 times or 5 times more expensive, but also they're small boats. And we were a little bit nervous, like Kaylee said, about the Drake Passage because, you see like it's the roughest waters in the world. And we've only ever been on 5-day cruises before. We've done like really short Caribbean cruises, but we've never done like a long cruise. So we were like, we don't even know how we would handle really rough waters. And so we decided to go on this bigger ship. Even though we wouldn't be able to get off, we'd still be able to see Antarctica. And 5 times less, and also a bigger ship, which means a lot less rocking going through rough waters, and seemed like the better choice. And now that we've done it, I think it was definitely a really good choice. We talked to a couple other people that had done one of the smaller ships and had gotten off on Antarctica. And I mean, of course, they had like a different experience. It's very intimate. There was like 120 people on these ships. But for us, I think it was a good mix of like adventure, but also like luxury and really good food and being able to hang out in the hot tubs that you wouldn't be able to do on these smaller ships.
Yeah, we had a great experience. Now, I mean, it would obviously be a totally different and amazing experience to go back and make a landing on Antarctica, but we're still young, and that's something we could always do in the future. But again, we started looking at some of those cruises, and the prices were between $10,000 and $20,000. And we were like, maybe not this time.
Yeah.
So ultimately, we decided to go on this 16-day cruise. It started in Buenos Aires, and then it went all the way down to Antarctica, and then came around the other side of South America to end in Santiago, Chile. So we started our journey in Buenos Aires, Argentina. We were there for like 3 or 4 days before the cruise. Pretty cool city. We were there during a time right now where they're kind of in an economic crisis and their money is deflating. And so
Inflating.
And so the exchange rate for us as Americans was really good. They're really wanting US dollars. So it was a good time for us to be there. At first, that made me a little nervous, like maybe there's some turmoil, some political strife, but we felt very safe there. Everything was great. The food was awesome, cool sights to see. The only negative really about Buenos Aires was the mosquitoes.
Yeah.
For some reason, of like all the places we've been, the mosquitoes were awful there. And we're like, it's a big city. Like you don't usually see a ton of mosquitoes in a big city with skyscrapers, but it was weird.
Yeah, mosquitoes, it's funny. Yeah, you normally don't see mosquitoes like that, but probably top 4 worst places we've ever been with mosquitoes.
I mean,
so.
and we've been to like the jungle before. We've been to South America. We've been to Southeast Asia. Like we've been all over the place. And I'm like, why are the mosquitoes so bad here?
Yeah, that was pretty bad. In terms of like what you said, the economic times there, yeah, it's pretty rough for the people there. They're operating pretty well though. To be 200% inflation, you'd think like there would be a lot more, I don't know, instability, I guess, but you really don't feel that at all when you're there, at least in the city. Or even in Patagonia, where we were in Antarctica, we really didn't feel that either.
In Argentina.
Or yeah, in Argentina. And so that was very interesting. And like Whitney said, the exchange rate there is already very favorable for dollars, but there's like all kinds of like gray market things where you can get higher exchange rates because they're trying to bring dollars into the country. So the official exchange rate, I don't know what it is now, but when we were there, it was around 900 per dollar, 900 pesos per dollar. And we would regularly get exchange rates of like 1,200 pesos per dollar just by using our dollars. So, you'd get a bill in pesos, but if you paid with US dollars, they would give you even a bigger discount because they really want to have dollars. And that's just like regular restaurants will do that. So it was a very interesting experience. We've never been somewhere that's going through as bad inflation as Argentina is now. So that was interesting to see.
Yeah, it was a really interesting experience. So as Jared alluded to, we did come back to Argentina later on the trip as well, which we'll talk about. But we left out of there to go on the cruise. We had quite a lot of sea days. One of our ports was the capital of Uruguay, and Montevideo is how they say it. And that was a pretty cool city. We were there for the day. And then we went down to a place called the Falkland Islands, which I'd never heard of, but it's a group of islands off pretty much the most southern part of Argentina. It's actually a British territory, even though Argentina claims that it is theirs. It's occupied by the British, and everybody there is British. Basically, they use the British pound. That was a really interesting, very strange place. The people we met there, it's just like very interesting. They're extremely isolated, but the really cool thing here is this is where we got to see penguins up close.
Yeah, that was an interesting experience. Like Whitney said, they call themselves British. The British call the Falkland Islands part of Britain, whereas Argentina, if you look at Argentinian maps, they a lot of times will call the Falkland Islands part of Argentina. And there was actually a war fought in the Falkland Islands over the territory in the 80s. Yeah. And so there's a lot of animosity there, and Argentina won't even let flights or ships or whatever leaving the Falkland Islands or going to the Falkland Islands pass through their waters or their airspace. So there's a lot of weird things about that area, but yeah, the penguins are the main reason for going there. So that was the part that we really enjoyed.
It was amazing because obviously we knew we were going to see penguins from the ship in Antarctica, but they were much further away from us. Whereas in the Falkland Islands, which is like, it's still basically in South America, but it's almost to the Antarctic Ocean, but I think it's still probably considered the Atlantic Ocean. But there's colonies of penguins that are have their natural habitat there, and there's places that you can go on the island that are extremely remote. We had to take a 2-hour Jeep ride, like off-road, like the most off-roading I've ever done. Like I've been on dirt roads and everything. No, this was like we were just driving over grass and like deep pits to get to the other side of this remote island where these penguins live. And it was fascinating because there were just hundreds, maybe even thousands of penguins just all around us. And they're pretty accustomed to the tourists coming now. Obviously, you can't get too close to them, but if you just stand in place, they'll walk really close to you. They were actually, it was so funny, they were really curious. They would like run up to you and like look at you, and you just had to stand really still and not get too close to them. It was really fascinating.
Yeah, that was, I knew we would see penguins. I thought we'd see a lot of penguins in Antarctica. But in reality, where we saw the most penguins by far was the Falkland Islands. There was just so many penguins there. And that area that we drove to is a very protected area. They've got game wardens walking around making sure that people aren't messing with the penguins or messing with their habitat or anything. And I mean, there are just thousands and thousands of penguins there that you can, they run right past you, they're going in the water, and that was really cool to see. Pretty unique, a bunch of different types of penguins as well.
Yeah, we saw 3 or 4 different species of penguins, and we didn't know a lot about the different kinds, but they were really cool to see. They all looked different, had different little features. Definitely the coolest ones that we saw were the king penguins. They're really tall and regal looking, sleek feathers, so amazing. We posted a couple pictures of those types of penguins where they were really close to us, and people were like, is that photoshopped? Super cool experience. So that was definitely one of our favorite ports from the cruise. And we actually apparently were lucky to port there because apparently the way the harbor is and the way the port is there, quite often if the weather is bad and the tides are rough, that a lot of the ships don't get to port there.
Yeah, apparently we didn't know this until after we already went there, but we have some friends on another boat that was supposed to go there and it got canceled. And they were told by the captain of their boat that less than half of the boats that are supposed to port there actually are able to do so. So when we were there, it was a pretty nice day. It was a little rainy, but pretty nice day overall. And we thought, you know, it was pretty normal. We had to tender into the harbor because their port is not big enough. But apparently not that many boats can actually even make it there because of weather and issues like that.
Yeah, so it was pretty lucky actually. So if you ever get a chance to go there, it was phenomenal. It was a very unique experience. So from there, we had several more sea days to pass through the infamous Drake Passage, which if you're not familiar is the water between South America and Antarctica, and it's where the 3 oceans meet, the Atlantic, the Pacific, and the Antarctic Ocean. Because at this latitude, there's no land mass. There's just oceans on all sides. The waves don't have anything to break on. Like there's no land to break the waves, so the waves can get really bad in this area. So we had been warned. We had all the motion sickness medication on hand. We were super worried, but it actually ended up not being that bad.
It wasn't bad at all. We were really lucky. The weather on the way down was especially nice. We could go out on the deck and the water was very calm. You could see really far. There was really good visibility. So we got very, very lucky on our Drake Passage, and that was something we were obviously worried about. And almost everyone that we've seen since we got back has asked us about it, and it went very smoothly. And before we left, Whitney looked it up, and it basically said that there's a lot of extremes in the Drake Passage. It can be either extremely rough or extremely still. And what was it? The Drake Lake?
They either call it like the
dreaded Drake or the Drake Lake.
Yeah, something like that.
So people were saying it was kind of one or the other, and we got the lake. It was,
I wouldn't say it was like perfectly calm. We went both times on the way down and the way back up. It was like mostly overnight, especially on the way back up. It was overnight, and it was a little rocky, but it wasn't terrible.
It was not nearly as rocky as the cruise ship we were on just a month and a half ago in the Caribbean. So yeah, it wasn't bad.
Yeah, and I also think that sometimes when you see videos like on TikTok and Instagram where people are talking about the Drake Passage being really bad, some of those are on those smaller expedition ships, which I think get tossed around quite a bit more, and then they're more at the level of the sea. So some of those people will have like their window is like right at the level, and you're seeing the water coming all the way up to their window. Because we were on a bigger ship, we're way up, multiple stories above the water. So we definitely didn't have water hitting our window or anything.
Also, I think sometimes people dramatize things for social media or dramatize. They make it seem like crazier than it is. But at least in our experience, it was not that bad.
Yeah. So we're getting a couple comments here about the war in the Falkland Islands in the 80s. We'd never heard of it until we went there. But apparently a lot of you guys know about it. Maureen says America sent supplies during the Falkland War to assist the British. Allie says, my sister's boyfriend is a retired Royal Marine and he fought in the Falkland Islands in the 80s. Very interesting, guys.
Yeah. So real quick about that, we talked to our tour guide because we had all day with this guy riding in the car, and he was telling us about it. He was probably in his 60s, and he said that it was traumatizing for the people there because one day they were just living their life like normal.
And they live in very small villages. It's a really very small community.
Yes, tiny. And one day the Argentinian Navy just showed up and were like holding people at gunpoint and speaking Spanish, and they don't know Spanish. Most of the people living there don't know Spanish. So they like were holding people at gunpoint and like raiding their houses and destroying stuff. And so it was really scary for them. And that lasted for a week or two until the British Navy came down. And once the British Navy got there, they pretty much destroyed the Argentinian Navy pretty quickly. But in the meantime, the people of the Falkland Islands were very scared about the whole situation, obviously.
Really interesting stuff. And I just want to like take an aside real quick and be like, if you're somebody who has just found our page and you're listening to this video and you're listening to our podcast and you're like, why are these travel therapist people talking about like the Falkland Islands? I know, like, yes, we do a lot of travel that's not travel therapy related. And sometimes we go back and forth about like, should we talk about this stuff? But at the same time, I just feel like, we're physical therapists and we're just out here having these experiences like all over the world, learning new things, meeting new people. And I don't know, I think it's pretty freaking cool that we're doing this kind of stuff. And like, we never would have done this otherwise. And we'd like to show you guys as physical therapists, occupational therapists, speech language pathologists, etc. Like, you can also be out here having cool adventures in your free time between work as a travel therapist. So just a side note.
Yeah, and not only that, we get questions about this stuff all the time on social media. So might as well talk about it. And I know there's a lot of people that want to do a very similar trip to us. We had tons and tons of Instagram messages like, how did you plan the trip? How did you find the cruise? All of that. So this is a good way to put all the information out.
Yeah. So just an FYI for if you're like newer to our page and you're like, why are we talking about this stuff? Because it's not our normal travel therapy stuff, but it is something that we're doing with our lives. So anywho, so after the Falkland Islands, after the Drake Passage, we went down and we had several what they called scenic cruising days in Antarctica. So Antarctica is obviously massive and it would take you a couple weeks to get all the way down to like the most southern part of it. So most of the cruise ships just go to the very northernmost part of Antarctica, which is called the Antarctic Peninsula. And there's lots that you can cruise around along the peninsula, lots of little islands and inlets and passages. And that's kind of cool because then you get up closer to the land there and see lots of icebergs, lots of glaciers, lots of ice fields, lots of wildlife. So we saw tons of whales. We saw some sea lions, lots of penguins, just so much ice.
Yeah.
Mountains.
It's really hard to explain how crazy Antarctica is. I mean, 90% of all the ice on the Earth is in Antarctica. And like, obviously we only saw the peninsula, but even there, seeing these mountains that are 6,000 or 7,000 feet high covered in ice, it's really amazing. And it's hard to understand the scale of it. The only way that we could really understand the scale, and even if like you had gotten off on land, it's not like you can really go far. It's all ice covered, right? So the only way you can really understand the scale is every now and then you'll see another ship and you see that in the foreground compared to these mountains of ice, these glaciers, and it is just so big that it's hard to believe. And one other way that we could tell the scale a little bit is every now and then some of the whales, like at first we saw, our first couple of days we were like, oh man, there's whales here, it's so cool. And we'd run out to the deck and see the whales. But we saw hundreds and hundreds of whales. So by the end it was like, oh, whales again. But every now and then we'd see whales breach. So they would jump out of the water. And that's when you could tell how big the ice was, because this whale that is closer to you than the ice is by miles is tiny, tiny compared to how big the glaciers are back there. And, we've seen a lot of glaciers, Switzerland, Norway, all over the world, but these glaciers and the icebergs and things there are just so massive.
Another way you could tell the scale a little bit is sometimes we would pass these icebergs and they can't get too close to them, right? So, because as you know, the whole Titanic thing, right? There's more of the iceberg underneath the water, right? So you don't really want your ship to get too close to the iceberg so it doesn't sink. So we're not too close to it, but we're fairly close to it. You're like, okay, there's the iceberg. I can see it right there. And they would be like, if you have binoculars, look closely. You see there's some little black dots on the iceberg. Look closely. So we'd zoom in with our camera or look with our binoculars, and there would be thousands of penguins on the iceberg. And from the naked eye, they just look like little dots.
Tiny, tiny, tiny little dots. And some of these icebergs, like we're passing by them, and our ship has 4,000 people on it. It's like a really big ship, including passengers and crew. And these icebergs are 10 times the size of our ship. And it's just, I've seen some icebergs before, but they're like, maybe the size of a house or maybe the size of a car. And you're like, oh, wow, that's really big. These icebergs are so big that it's really insane.
Yeah, we saw some incredible stuff. So we actually got to take a little detour from our route and go see the biggest iceberg currently in the world. And that was really interesting. Do you want to tell them a little bit of the facts about the
so if you
iceberg?
Before we started, if you'd said, oh, the biggest iceberg in the world, I would think like, oh, it's probably one of those ones I was talking about, 10 times the size of the ship, like really big. This iceberg is unimaginably big. It's It's bigger than the island of Oahu. It's bigger than the island of Maui. It's massive.
I think they said it was 2 times the size of New York City.
I think it's like 60 square miles or something like that, and something like 10 or 2 trillion tons of ice. And so like we got up to it, and you can look as far as you can in every direction, all the way down, and you can't see where it ends. It's just the biggest piece of ice that I could ever imagine.
So you would have just thought it was land.
You would have thought it's land.
You would have just thought this is an island that has ice on it, but it's not. It's floating independently on its own, and it's on the move. Our captain had to like locate it on the navigation system to see where it is, because this cruise, they go from one side of South America back to the other and back a few times. They make the same trip, and he said a week ago when he was there, it was in a different place, so they had to go find it.
So it broke off the Antarctic ice shelf like a couple decades ago, and it's been floating in the water. But yeah, look it up. A23A, the biggest iceberg in the world, and it's impossibly big. You just can't even imagine that there could be a piece of ice floating in the ocean that is as big as like a state. It's so big.
Yeah. So needless to say, Antarctica was just out of this world. That for us is it's like the ultimate. So we've seen a lot. We've been to all the national parks. We've been now to all 7 continents, and we've been to beaches and mountains and all over the world. To us, some of the most amazing things that exist are glaciers and mountains that are covered in ice. We've seen them in lots of different countries, as Jared mentioned: Norway, Switzerland, Alaska, Canada. To us, it's just the most magnificent thing to see. Of course, the deserts in Arizona and Utah are beautiful, and the beaches in Hawaii and Key West are beautiful, but to us, glaciers and icebergs are just insane. They're like unfathomable. So in our opinion, if you like nature, if you like that kind of thing, if you can take a cruise down to Antarctica, we used to think that was like an impossible trip to take, but it really wasn't. I mean, you just fly down to South America and get on a cruise ship. It's not that hard.
Not only was it not impossible, but I definitely think we'll do another one at some point in our life. Take some other people, and just to be able to see that kind of stuff from a ship for a reasonable price. I mean, $2,000 per person for 16 days of lodging and food, and then to be able to see like some of the most remote parts of the world, like that was extremely, extremely good value in my opinion.
Yeah, so it was fantastic. So just to kind of wrap up, we went to Antarctica, and then we came back up through the Drake Passage, and then we had a few more ports in South America on our way to Chile. So we actually had a few stops in Patagonia, which is really funny because we kind of overlooked that as part of our cruise itinerary. We were just like, oh, Antarctica cruise. But we were like, oh, we're actually going to parts of Patagonia now on the cruise ship before we actually come back down to Patagonia. Patagonia is a pretty big region. So we went to a place called Ushuaia that's on the Argentina side. That was pretty cool. That's in the Tierra del Fuego area.
They call that the end of the world because it's extremely far south on the South American continent, and it's like basically part of the last part of landmass on the world until you get down to Antarctica.
Mm-hmm. And then we got to sail through some of the Chilean fjords. So if you look really closely at the map, the continent of South America is not all continuous down at the bottom. There's just tons of little islands that have been formed over millennia by the glaciers. And it creates all these fjords. So we've done fjord tours in Alaska before and Norway. So we got a little bit of an extra bonus to see the Chilean fjords. That was really beautiful. We had one more stop in Punta Arenas, Chile, and then we had a few sailing days to get to our endpoint, which was in Santiago, Chile, which is the capital of Chile.
Yeah, and those last few days, it's hard to believe, but South America is obviously really big, and just going from Punta Arenas to Santiago was like 3 days of sailing to get there. And in my mind, when I thought about South America, I thought like, oh yeah, Santiago's at the bottom. But I mean, really, it's not. It's like, it's very long continent that, to get all the way to Ushuaia from Santiago is a very long distance. So yeah, it was beautiful going through the fjords and everything. That was actually not even supposed to be part of our trip, but we took a detour, and the detour was really awesome.
Yeah. So the cruise was phenomenal. Highly recommend. Obviously, there's tons of cruise companies. It just kind of depends on like the timing and the cost and the itinerary and that sort of thing. I would say the negative for some people for this type of cruise could be that it has a different starting and ending point, but that didn't really matter to us because we usually book a one-way flight down and one-way flight back. no matter where we travel. So it really wasn't a big deal for us. We were both going to be going to Chile and Argentina regardless, so it didn't matter to us.
It actually worked out well for us because flights from Santiago to Patagonia are cheaper than flights from Buenos Aires to Patagonia because it's the main part of Patagonia where the W Trek and everything is part of Chile. So you're flying from Santiago, Chile to Patagonia, the Patagonian side of Chile, or the Chilean side of Patagonia, and so it's even cheaper to fly from there. So it worked out really well that it was a one-way because then we could fly down to Patagonia for less.
Yeah. So amazing cruise. So then we were getting ready to start the next part of our adventure. We spent a couple days in Santiago. Side note, this trip was really hard to pack for because our starting point in Buenos Aires as well as Santiago were extremely hot. The summertime in those places, you're closer to the equator. You're on the coast, not at a higher elevation, unlike where we ended the trip in Ecuador, which we'll tell you about in a little while. That is right on the equator, but it's higher elevation, so it wasn't as hot. So it was
100-degree temperatures in
really
Buenos
hot
Aires.
in Santiago.
And the sun is extremely intense and easy to get sunburnt. And then meanwhile, we have to pack for also Antarctica, where it was, the highs were like 30 and it was really windy, so you had to be all bundled up to go outside on the deck, and at night it's like teens or less. So it was hard to pack for. This is probably the trip that was the most hard to pack for.
Yeah, especially because we like to travel only with carry-ons in order to avoid losing our luggage, and like it just makes it easier because we're going from place to place to place to place. So I definitely overpacked in the beginning because we also needed like some, we thought, dressier outfits for the cruise. So when we got to Santiago, I mailed a box back home with some of the clothes that we weren't going to need anymore to lighten our load, so that helped. But yeah, that was interesting. Okay, so then we spent a couple days in Santiago, just kind of see the capital real quick, and then we flew down to Patagonia to start like the next chapter of this trip.
Yeah, Patagonia has been on our bucket list for as long as we can remember. We had a trip already booked to Patagonia in 2020 that we were really excited for, and obviously that all got canceled because of COVID. And so now this is 4 years later that we're booking the same trip back to Patagonia. So we've had a lot of anticipation to get down there and see it. And it definitely did not disappoint. It's up there with the most beautiful things we've ever seen in terms of like, you know, our favorite places before this, probably Alaska, Switzerland, Norway, some of the amazing mountains and glaciers. And Patagonia is right up there in the top three for sure.
Yeah, so the big thing for this section of the trip was going to be hiking. So a lot of people know about the W Trek or the O Trek. You've probably heard of that. That's on the Chilean side of Patagonia. So you typically will stay in Puerto Natales, and then kind of start from there and then go to the national park called Torres del Paine from there. And then in Torres del Paine is where they have these highly trafficked trails that kind of go, one of them is in the shape of a W, or if you do the harder one that goes all the way around, it's in the shape of an O. And it's really remote there. There's not a lot of lodging. They have what are called refugios, which is like a hostel that are run by the national park. And other than that, there's really not a lot of places to stay. It was either, there's like 2 hotels run by the national park, which were literally over $1,000 per night. It was like the most expensive hotel we've ever seen. Or the refugios were quite expensive for what we were expecting, because in most of South America, it's like really affordable. But because of supply and demand, because so many people want to come there, and there's just nowhere to stay. We stayed in like the hostels, the refugios, for just a room, a bed in a room, a bunk bed with like 6 other people in your room. It was like $80 per person per night just for the bed.
Yeah.
And then if you want food, which you really don't have much opportunity to have your own food or get food from anywhere else, so you might as well just get full room and board and get food there, then that's like another $80. So it was like basically $160 per person per night to stay in a 6-bed dorm.
Yeah, it was, everything else down in South America is pretty affordable. Like anywhere we've been there, I would say is probably at least half or maybe even less the cost of the United States for most things. But Patagonia, that is not the case. It is as expensive, if not more expensive, than any trip you would take in the United States. And like Whitney said, that is all because of supply and demand. And even with the really high prices, it is still packed. Like every single night we stayed at one of these hostels, it was completely booked. And we had to book several months in advance to even get the beds that we got. So
yeah, because some people that didn't book in advance, there just wasn't lodging, so they had to sleep in tents. That was the only choice.
And the tents, I mean, there was tents everywhere. You had to either bring your own tent or rent a tent, and you had to rent a site, and even that was expensive. So if you rented a tent and a site and a sleeping bag, you would pay just as much as it was to stay inside in one of the...
it was like $60 instead of $80. And we were like, for $20 more, we can have a bed and be inside? Like, yes.
Yeah. So Patagonia is not a cheap place, but it is an extremely, extremely beautiful place.
Yeah. So like I was saying, so the main attraction there on the Chilean side is Torres del Paine National Park. And if you've ever seen pictures, you've probably seen pictures of one of the most iconic hikes there to the towers. So Torres del Paine means towers of Paine. I don't know if Paine is a guy, Paine. I don't know if that's a person's name, but Torres means towers. So that's the most iconic thing that you'll see there is like these granite towers in the mountains. So that's like the most iconic part of the W trek. Fortunately, we had really nice weather the day that we went there, really clear skies. We got great views. The only thing about the weather while we were there, we had heard that they call Patagonia the windiest place on earth, and it was absolutely true. So this kind of goes back to one of the reasons why the Drake Passage is so treacherous, because at that latitude there's nothing else. If you look all around the globe at the rest of the world, it's the southernmost landmass. So even Australia and Africa and everything is more north than that. So when the wind comes around the earth, there's nothing else to stop it. And so it just really hits that part of South America very hard. So the land is very barren, not much grows there because the winds are so intense. And it was like nothing we'd ever experienced before. Like when the winds would come through, we would have to hunker down to the ground to not blow away.
Yeah, I thought that I knew like some pretty strong winds, but probably some of the strongest winds that I've ever experienced in our part of the U.S. Besides, we did have one crazy time in Badlands National Park where the wind was pretty crazy. It was probably like 60-mile-an-hour gusts, and we were up on a ridge, and it was like making the whole car shake, and that was a little scary. But besides that, I would say the baseline wind there, not gusts, not a crazy storm or anything, is like the heaviest winds we ever get in Virginia. And the one day that Whitney's talking about, we were doing the hike to the towers, and there's a pass there that they call Windy Pass along the trail. And on the way there, it was very windy. We were like, wow, this is crazy. It was probably 60 or 70 mile an hour gusts. And
we thought it was funny. We thought it was cute.
Yeah,
we were taking
funny
videos. We were like putting our arms out to make our sleeves flap in the wind. We're like, oh, it's funny. It's windy. Ah.
And when a particularly big gust comes, it actually would like push you a little bit. And it's like, oh, wow, this crazy wind. So we went through there, went all the way to the top. And on the way back, probably 4 or 5 hours later, the wind had really picked up. And then it wasn't so funny. It was like, we went back and looked later because we knew it was insane wind, and on the forecast it said that the gusts on that pass were over 100 miles an hour, and it was so, the wind was so crazy that you really did, if there was a big gust, you had to get down and crouch down. Even me, weighing over 200 pounds, it would push me like towards the cliff, so you have to be really careful, and never experienced wind like that. I would have never known that you could be it's a sunny day. It's not like we were in the middle of a storm or anything. It's a sunny day, and you're having these wind gusts that would, like, if you were standing beside the cliff, it would push you over. So,
and it would pelt you with sand and with pebbles and rocks, and it was scary. It was a little bit interesting, but yeah, that was something crazy about Patagonia. In our experience, it would tend to pick up in the afternoon, so you're better off to get your hike started earlier, because it seemed like every single day the winds would hit in the afternoon. Some days worse than others.
But these hikes are really long, so even we were starting a lot of our hikes 7 or 6:30. But I mean, even then you're out there for 10 hours. So by the time you get back, it's going to be very windy. So no matter how early you start, it's going to be pretty windy at some point.
Yeah. So regarding the W trek, we had looked into doing the W trek, and we've known friends that have done it. Some people do it with a guide. Some people do it with porters. There's refugios along the way, but you kind of have to plan out the logistics of like where you're going to sleep and where you're going to stay, and are you going to pack all your stuff with you or not. So we don't have a lot of experience. Well, let me rephrase. We have no experience with multi-day backpacking. I don't know if Laura and Justin have.
I'm sure they've done something like that.
But we all got to talking about it, and we were like, that seems like a lot to figure out what to do with the rest of our stuff while taking just our hiking stuff for overnight. And so we decided to do them more as day trips. And in talking to other people, it kind of seems like most people that do the W trek do some form of this, where they kind of like move from one refugio to another and do them as out and backs, so that you don't actually have to hike it through with all your stuff. So we basically stayed outside the park on the first day and did one leg of it. We skipped the second leg, which they say is like not very scenic anyway. It's like the most boring day. We drove that section, and then we went to the third leg of it, and then one day did one part of the W, and the next day did the next part. So we did basically 3 out of 4 of the major legs, and the fourth one we just kind of drove instead of hiked, just for logistical purposes. So all in all, I think we hiked over 75 miles in 3 days.
Not in 3 days. And the whole time in Patagonia was
right, that was the whole time. That was like 40
It was probably,
miles in 3 days,
in 3 days it was probably around 45 miles or something.
So we did a lot of hiking. It was a lot of fun, but definitely exhausting. One of the days we had rain, but it wasn't too bad. And we went to what's called Gray Glacier. And we did a kayaking excursion there at the glacier, which was pretty cool because we kayaked around icebergs and got to go up close to the glacier. So that was really neat. So overall, had a blast in the Chilean side. It was just more... It was a lot more like logistics and planning than we thought, but
also very busy. Our friends that have done it, they go kind of more in the shoulder season. We were going in the busiest season, like January, February are the busiest times there, and I mean, some of the trails were pretty busy, and even starting really early, we didn't have that many people going up. We hiked pretty fast and we started early, but on the way down, you're passing just like hundreds of people, and so. If you go, I would say if you can kind of avoid the most busy part, it probably is a good idea because it is kind of annoying to pass so many people on like narrow trails sometimes. But yeah, the trails were really amazing and the views were incredible.
Yeah, so January tends to be the busiest time. So I would say if you could go in like February, March, or April, probably a little bit better of a time to go. Our friends Kim and Aaron that do the Travcest adventure trips, they go in April with groups. I think they are already booked for this year. They may have 1 or 2 openings. So check their page for sure if you're interested in going this year. If not, maybe you could plan it for another year. But again, a lot of people mostly go to the Chile side, and that was mainly what we had heard about. But luckily, our friends had also looked into going to the Argentinian side, and I think maybe you'd done some research there too. And we were like, yeah, we're already there. Like, let's go to the Argentina side as well. And we actually ended up liking the Argentina side a lot better than the Chile side. Not that we didn't like the Chile side. We just thought that there was more pros than cons on the Argentina side.
Yeah, the Argentinian side, definitely not as busy. And it's not like laid out like a trail like the W Trek is, which is, I think, why it's not as popular. So the W Trek, if you just start at one end and you hike the whole thing, it's like a 4 or 5 day trip and it's like this major adventure. Whereas in Argentina, it's more day hikes. And we basically, like when you factor in how much it costs for the W Trek, stay in the refugios, and how primitive everything is, and the fact that we weren't doing like the whole like walking, carrying all of our stuff on the trek anyway, we definitely like the Argentinian side better. It was cheaper, it was easier to find somewhere to stay. You could stay like right by the trail and like walk to the trail to start in the morning.
The logistics just weren't as difficult in Argentina. Like you could just rent a regular Airbnb, go to regular restaurants in the town. It wasn't this like remote thing where you had to only stay in the national park provided lodging. So there's not this like price gouging. So I don't know. There were some things we liked about the Argentina side better, but
and then the views were better on the Argentinian side too. Like both sides are great, but I would say if you had to choose one or the other, I would go to the Argentinian side. There's 2 different towns that you stay there, and one of them you get a really, really up close of this massive glacier that you can walk on. We did a glacier trekking on it, so walking on it, that was really cool to do. And then you can also go to the other town, and there's a hike there that's probably 15 miles, something like that. And the views at the end of that trail are even better than anything you see in the Chilean side of Patagonia.
Yeah, so the main town that you go to on the Argentinian side is called El Calafate, and the national park there is Los Glaciares, so like the Glaciers National Park, but it's in Spanish. And in El Calafate, you can drive to Perito Moreno Glacier, which is the one that Jared was talking about. So we did a glacier trek on there, and that was like the 3rd time we've ever done walking right on the ice. And it was incredible. We love anytime we get to walk on a glacier. Again, we just think that's like one of the most amazing things this earth has to offer. It's like a remnant of the Ice Age, right? So that was really cool. You take a boat across this lake, and then you go right on the ice, drink glacier water, all that. Really beautiful. And then when you get done with your ice trek, they also have other options. There's like a longer ice trek. We did the shorter one. There's ice kayaking there as well. But then also when you're just in the national park, they have built these boardwalks that are easy to walk on, easy for anyone to see. So even if you're not somebody who hikes a lot, you're listening to us talk about the hikes and you're like, oh my God, I can't go to this place. I can't hike 15 miles. No, this is super user friendly. These boardwalks, you go right up to the glacier and you can just see it super close up.
Yeah,
Gorgeous.
probably 200 yards away. You can see the glacier and you can see calving there. We saw tons and tons of calving. We waited a couple hours. And
ice calving is where the ice breaks off.
Probably 50 times we saw ice break off this glacier. So very, very common to see there, at least in this part of the year. So that was really cool to see.
Just absolutely stunning. Every glacier we've ever seen is unique. They're all completely different. I would say this might be one of the prettier ones that we've seen. It was just amazing, the vantage point you could have of it. So I love that glacier. So that was awesome. And then we rented a car, but it's actually a really bus friendly area. You can easily take a bus from one town to the other. But we drove, and then we drove to the other town where Jared was talking about the hike, and that one's called El Chaltén. We loved that little town. It was a cute little town, lots of great food. We ate like such good food there. Great beer, all that.
And it's like the town is small, and when you're coming into the town, it's just this little tiny little
Village,
part of
really.
Basically at the base of these massive mountains.
Yeah.
And so there's a bunch of restaurants. It's pretty touristy. It's like the right amount of touristy, I would say. Maybe a little too touristy, but definitely not like the Chilean part of Patagonia where like everyone is there as a tourist. But there's a bunch of restaurants, so you get a little bit of like a mix of there's plenty of outdoor stuff to do, but then also it's not so primitive or whatever that you're like sleeping on a bunk bed in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. So unfortunately our weather was a little bit rougher there. We had more rain and we had more fog. So we had trouble seeing the views. But luckily on our final day, when we were actually leaving town, there were some really great vantage points just at road pull-offs. So again, I would say if you're somebody who isn't a big hiker, the Argentina side of Patagonia is a lot more accessible, yes. You can just see a lot without hiking. Honestly, on the last day, as we drove out of town and went to the overlooks, we saw the best views of the whole trip, better than even any of the hikes that we did, just from the viewpoints, because it was really clear that day. Now, had it been really clear the day that we did the hikes, the hike to the end point of that same view would have been better, but it was foggy the day we were there.
It was decently clear. I mean, there was some clouds and stuff, but I mean, in terms of like some of the weather in like Patagonia, Antarctica, and even like northern Norway, like these pretty extreme remote places, it can be very variable, I guess, and it can be extremely cloudy, extremely foggy. So I would say on the scale of 1 to 10, it was probably only like a 2 in terms of like obstructed view, but we got a pretty good view of everything.
Yeah. So loved it, had a great time in the Argentinian side, and then we wrapped up our trip by flying back to Buenos Aires to leave. We spent overall like about 2 weeks in the Patagonia part as well. So that was incredible. Highly recommend if you guys get a chance to go down to Patagonia. It definitely lived up to the hype. Just
Yes.
A lot of logistics, a lot of planning. So do your research.
Yeah, I would definitely like to go back to Patagonia again as well.
Yep. So our friends ended their trip there in Buenos Aires. We spent 5 weeks with Laura and Justin. Again, they were also travel PTs who we've met before. We first met them at CSM in 2019, and then we continued to hang out with them every year at TravCon. So never would have met these friends if it weren't for Travel PT. So I'm super glad that we did meet them and that we have formed such a good friendship and have people that we can actually like travel with, and it went really well. They had to head back home, and we were like close to coming back home then too, but we had also really been wanting to go to Ecuador. So we decided to tack an extra week onto our trip to make it 6 weeks and stop in Ecuador on the way back.
Yeah, just like in our fashion, where we had a time crunch and then we're just like packing things in. But Ecuador is somewhere we've wanted to go for a really
time
long
crunch
time.
because CSM. So if we had come back early, we would have had a whole week at home. before going to Boston for the APTA conference. However, because we put Ecuador in there, we only had one day at home between Ecuador and the conference. So it was definitely cutting it close, but we looked at it like, well, we're already in South America and Ecuador's on the way back, so it like broke up our flight.
And it really did. And I'm really glad we did go to Ecuador. We tried to go there again 4 years ago when we had that Patagonia trip. That was supposed to be a 4 or 5 month trip that we had. And so all of those plans that we had places booked in Ecuador and everything, all that got canceled. So it was nice to finally make it there. And we actually met a PT that lives half of the year in Ecuador. She's lived there for like 22 years, half the year in Ecuador, half the year doing travel contracts in the US. And her house is like 2 hours north of the capital. So we flew into Quito, we stayed the night there, and then we went up to her house and stayed with her for 4 or 5 days. And that was a really unique experience to be able to get out of the city. And we were in the cloud forest region of Ecuador, pretty high elevation, very, very beautiful. That was something that we would never have been able to do if we didn't know somebody there, because it's not easy to take a bus up there. We had to actually get her to come and pick us up and then take us back. So it was that was a very unique thing that we got to see there. And then we also got to spend a couple days in Quito as well. Ecuador is a really beautiful country. I'm sure that some of you guys have heard probably 3 or 4 weeks ago, they've had a lot of issues with like cartels and stuff. And we were nervous. We were very on the fence about going when we heard that. We already had everything booked. We had our flights booked. We thought about canceling everything, but we talked to her. We talked to some of our Airbnb hosts, and they said it's not really a big deal. And so we decided to go, and it really wasn't a big deal. Everything that we saw was completely normal. So we're really glad that we went, and that is a very beautiful country I would love to spend more time in.
Yeah, just like with anything, like if you have a friend that's not from the US and they hear about a fire in California, or they hear about a riot in a certain city,
or a volcano eruption in Hawaii.
Yeah, or a school shooting or something like that, and they call you or text you and they're like, "Are you okay?" And you're like, "Yeah, I'm in Kansas." Like, you know,
it's 2,000 miles away.
Yeah, I'm in North Carolina. Like, you know, the country's big, right? Ecuador is not obviously as big as the US, but the problems that they were having with the cartels and everything were really very isolated to only certain areas. And so we were lucky that where we were going was not affected, and everything seemed to be good. And it really, dispelled any doubt, because our friend Cheryl lives there and she reassured us. So shout out to Cheryl for having us at your guest house. We really appreciate it. If anybody is interested in visiting Ecuador, we'd love to get you in touch with our friend Cheryl. Again, she has lived there for over 20 years, and she's an American PT who works part-time in the US and lives in Ecuador. She has this beautiful guest house in the cloud forest. It was just so tranquil. It was exactly what we needed at the end of a really busy trip, because we were very go with our cruise and our hiking and everything. So to spend a few days just like chilling at her place in the cloud forest and the hammock and everything, it was really, really nice. You're right there, and the cloud forest is basically like a rainforest, but it's at a higher elevation, and the clouds fill the valleys, and it's really beautiful, and there's just tons of birds, and you just listen to the sounds, and it's like really peaceful. We went to some waterfalls, we went to a chocolate farm, we went to a coffee farm, really enjoyed it. And then we were also, as Jared mentioned, after we left Cheryl's place, we went to Quito for a couple of days, the capital, and they were having their carnival, which is very common in all South America, that they celebrate Carnival. You may well know, I think the most well-known one is like the one in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, where they do these big parades and floats and all this stuff. They don't do quite as much of that in Ecuador. I think maybe they might usually, but right now with them having some political problems, they were not doing as much. So unfortunately, we didn't get to see any like big parades or anything, but we did see some singing and dancing. And a big thing they do there is water fights. So they used to throw apparently like water balloons, and then Cheryl was telling us the thing used to be they would throw a water balloon on you and then throw a flower on you so it would stick. But apparently they banned it in Quito. So now instead, sometimes they do water guns, or they do this like spray foam stuff.
It's almost like shaving cream, but kids are running around with these bottles, spraying everybody, spraying each other. So there was a lot of that, and if you were walking anywhere downtown, you'd definitely get sprayed by foam.
Yeah, so we thought we could maybe avoid it. We thought, oh, maybe the kids will just do it to each other because they're just, if like see somebody else has the spray. No, we did not come out unscathed. We got hit with the shaving cream like quite a bit, the spray foam. But
sometimes it was even drive-bys too. They would drive by and roll down the back window and spray you out the window.
Yeah, it was really fun though. It was really nice. And yeah, the people in Ecuador are just super friendly and super nice. So we had a great time there. But yeah, so that was our 6-week trip. We went to Argentina, had a stop in Uruguay, went to the Falkland Islands, Antarctica, Chile, down to the Patagonia region, and then finished with a week in Ecuador. So that brought us to a total of 56 countries that we visited now. And that's just countries. When we were looking at it, we were like, what does Falkland Islands count as? It's a territory. We've been to lots of islands and places that are territories of other places, but just as far as countries go, 56 countries and all 7 continents.
Yeah, that was a really cool trip. It was 6 weeks is one of our shorter trips in terms of like these international trips that we do. But like I said, it was very action packed. So I feel like in 6 weeks we did just as much as we would in one of our like 3-month-long trips. With all the hiking and everything. And like Whitney said, between Argentina and the Chilean and the Argentinian side of Patagonia, we hiked like 75 or 80 miles in a week. So it was a very busy and active time for us. And but the views were amazing, and I definitely would go back to do pretty much everything that we did again. I would do the exact same trip. There's still so much to see, and it would be worth it to do the same thing again. Yeah,
so if you're interested in a trip like that, like, you should definitely do it. We loved Patagonia. We loved Antarctica. It's such an amazing part of the world to visit. So yeah, it was awesome. So, to be determined if it really is our last big international trip. Want to talk a little bit about like our plans coming up. Oh, well, before we do that, let's talk about CSM. So we got back, like we mentioned, we were only home for a day, and then we'd already been planning for the last like 4 or 5 months to go to CSM, and that's the APTA American Physical Therapy Association combined sections meeting. If you're not familiar with it, it's like the biggest PT conference of the year every year. This year it was in Boston, so we've gone. This was like our 4th or 5th year going.
I think it's our 5th year.
And so we hosted a meetup there for current and aspiring travel therapists. We partnered with one of the staffing companies that we've gone with in the past, AMN Healthcare. So we were at their booth. We got to talk to a lot of students and clinicians, see some of our travel PT friends. Yeah, lots of people. We saw like some current travelers that we know, Jeff and Erica, Kelly, Martin, Hillary, some people from our alma maters. My school, ODU, Jared's school, Radford. Some of the students were there, came and asked us questions. I think there were 17,000 people there this year, so it was pretty busy. Mm-hmm. Boston in the winter was not ideal, but we actually got pretty decent weather. It was cold, but we didn't get a whole lot of snow or anything. Yeah, they were calling for snow, but luckily it didn't snow as much as they thought, because we were worried that like some stuff was going to get canceled. So yeah, CSM was great. We had a meetup. We had like 50 or so people at the meetup. It was awesome. Really good time. It's always great to see people in person, especially people that we've like talked to online for a while and finally get to meet in person. So really fun. But now we just got back home on Saturday night, and we're glad to just be home for a while. As I glance over to my left, our Christmas tree is still up. Yes. Because we were in a hurry. Again, we left on December 31st, right after Christmas, and we were just like, whatever, we're gonna leave it. So I keep thinking like, oh my gosh, we gotta take the Christmas tree down. We still have Christmas presents that are barely unpackaged. I got a new laptop for Christmas and for thanks, Jared, and I haven't used it yet. He's like, set it up, and I'm like, not before the trip. I can't think about this right now. Yes, our Christmas tree's still up, but Whitney will not turn the lights on because she thinks that people will see it through the window and think that we're crazy. Yeah, I'm embarrassed because it's like the end of February. But it's still up. We might as well turn it on. Well, if we had been the people who were just like going to commit to it, and we'd been home all of January and February and been turning it on, I think it's like, you know what? Fine, I'll commit to it. But I think it's weird that they're going to have seen like for 6 weeks, nobody had the Christmas tree on, and then we just turn it on, and then they're going to be like, did they just put it up? Like what? So I'm like, no, let's not turn it on. So she thinks our 3 neighbors are going to think we're crazy. Yeah, they are. So anyway, but we're glad to be home. We're definitely home for like the next month. We've got a talk at Jared's alma mater on Friday about travel PT. Go talk to the students there at Radford. When's that North Carolina conclave? That's in April. So yeah, we don't have a lot of trips coming up. The only thing we have is the Club Core Med trip, which is going to be in March. We go to that mostly every year, so that'll be in Mexico.
About a month from now.
Yep, so we have that, and then after that we have nothing really planned because we're just kind of going to see what happens. Again, kind of keeping an eye out for a house, kind of planning on being around more this year and hopefully start a family, and we'll see. But we are kind of thinking about taking a contract near home, but that's to be determined. We would probably do it in Virginia, like not that far from home. So that way we could still be home in case a great house pops up or something like that. So we'll see. Yeah, it's kind of a weird year because we're like trying not to plan too far ahead.
But it would be good to be back in the clinic a little bit. It's been quite a while for me. So ideally we find a good travel job that we can do part-time and a couple hours from home, and maybe start that in the next month or 6 weeks or so.
Yeah, if you guys aren't familiar, so again, we don't work full-time as travelers anymore. The last couple of contracts that we have done, we have negotiated a part-time contract, which isn't that common. Most of the contracts that you're going to see as a travel therapist are going to be asking for full-time hours, 40 hours, sometimes 32 or 36. But because we have a lot of connections in the industry and we know a lot of recruiters, we have negotiated a couple of times where the clinic would let us do part-time hours. Basically like split a caseload. Like I do 2 days, he does 2 days. We did that in Alaska. We both worked 2 8-hour days, and that worked out really well because we do quite a bit with Travel Therapy Mentor with our business, and it keeps us busy. So yeah, we'll see. Just keep an eye out on our pages. And then as far as content goes, we definitely need to do another job market update here soon. Keep you guys afoot of like what's happening in the job market. It's been a little while since we've asked all the recruiters, so we'll get back to you on that.
Yeah, we haven't got any specific numbers for a while, but at the conference we talked to about a dozen of our recruiters, and a bunch of our companies were there, and we talked to them at their booths, and so we got a little bit of a feel for the job market. So we'll have to send out some emails and get some actual numbers to share, but we'll try to do a job market update sometime in the next couple weeks.
Yeah, but so far everything seems pretty normal. It definitely seems like PTs are still really in high demand. So yeah, keep an eye out, and hopefully we'll put out some more content about that soon. We are also behind on articles. I've got a couple of guest posts that I need to publish soon. We have a guest post from a traveler who went PRN for a while, and now she's going back to traveling, so she's going to talk about that transition. We've got a guest post coming up from another therapist who is a pediatric PT. She works in schools, and she's going to share some information about being a pediatric travel therapist. And I've been meaning to publish that for a while now, but I just, again, have been very busy, so we'll get that out to you guys soon.
Yep, and if you guys have any ideas or anything you want to hear about in terms of an article or video, we're going to have more time to do content now over the next couple months, so let us know. Either comment on here, send us an email, and we will try to get some content out soon.
Yep. So again, sorry for our little hiatus, but hopefully you guys enjoyed our Antarctica pictures on Instagram and Facebook, and our Patagonia pictures. And I do have some more content to put out about that too. We're going to do some recap articles. I still have a recap article to do from our Europe trip. Some people had asked about our Norway itinerary, so I am going to put out some stuff on that. So yeah, just keep your eyes peeled. Hopefully we'll be able to get caught up on all that now that we're home.
Yep. All right, I think that's all we got to talk about. Again, if you have any ideas, send us an email. We would appreciate it. But yeah, probably back to videos every couple weeks, and yeah, some new content coming soon.
Yeah, and thank you guys for listening. If you did watch live on Facebook, we would love if you would just hit the thumbs up button and let us know, or leave us a little comment and let us know that you watched. And also talks if you listened later on the podcast.
Yep, and shout out to everyone we saw at CSM.
Yeah.
Comment below. Let us know. We saw so many people, talked to so many people, and that's always so much fun.
Yeah. Actually, Kaylee just said hi. Hi, Kaylee. We got to see Kaylee and her boyfriend Jared at CSM. We first met them when we did a talk in Florida at the Florida Student Conclave last year, and now they're getting ready to graduate and they're planning on traveling. So very excited for you guys.
Yep. All right. Take care, everyone.
All right. Good night.
Bye.